Okay, you are live.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Naptime News. My name is Mary Grace. I am one of our behavior specialists from our screening and intervention department. I am really excited to spend the next hour with you. We are going to be tackling some behavior issues today. Obviously, behavior is my jam since I'm a behavior specialist. I think all behavior comes from somewhere. So today we're kind of just scratching the surface. I want us to just talk about where behavior comes from, why it happens, and we're also going to touch a little bit on trauma. But because Naptime News is only 1 hour of our day together, it's just a crash course. So if you have questions, you can certainly ask them in the chat. And I've got Juanita who's helping me out today. So she will let me know when I have questions. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. But again, I'm super excited to be here with you. This is only my second time doing one of these Naptime Newses. So hopefully technology works the way it's supposed to. And, you know, we'll take it from there and we'll see what happens. So as I said, we are talking about the functions of behavior, and we're also going to touch on trauma and resilience. Before we do dive right in, though, some of you who are tuning in may be curious about what our department actually does, part of our screening and intervention team. So my team has developmental specialists, behavior specialists, and an inclusion specialist that will come out to your program when you have concerns with a child's development or behavior. We receive all of the ASQs that are filled out, and we also take requests for service. And this is important for me to share because not everybody knows that we have requests for service. And basically what that is if you have a concern with a child's development, and this includes private pay as well, but if you have concerns with development or behavior, you can go to our website, to the screening and intervention link at the top, and print out a request for service form from our page. You fill out what the concerns are, the child's information, and the parent signs that second page, and then you submit it to us, and it will get assigned depending on where in the county it is and what the concerns are. So as I said, you know, whether they are school readiness or private pay, you certainly can send them to us. That's what we're here for. We will do on-site observations and give tips and techniques to teachers who need them. We also can speak with parents to give them tips and techniques, or if there are other interventions that are needed. So our department, we love getting out there into the community and helping you. And some exciting news, our department, specifically in our behavior specialist area, is growing. We've hired some new additional behavior specialists to support myself and Erin Taylor, who is the South County behavior specialist. So we are going to have some new faces joining our department very soon. So that's my little plug for what our department does. And also, you should have received an email, an e-news, about Behavior Boot Camp, which is a new initiative that we are starting that is for programs who are experiencing a large number of behavioral challenges. If you're looking for more guidance for your teachers regarding social emotional development, this is a 10-month program, and you will have an assigned specialist who will come out to your school, who will provide resources, who will provide support. And so if you are interested in this program, you can fill out the application, and they are due this upcoming Monday. And then email your completed applications to Kelly Miller. I have her email address right on the slide here. If you have any questions about it, I also have my email down there in the corner. It's a little smaller, so that you can ask any questions. You can send out that application, and then we're going to start the screening process. But it's a really great program for programs who are just looking to learn more about behavior, social emotional development, and to get some support. So that's my little shameless plug out there. Do we have any questions at all before I actually get into our functions of behavior topic for today? So give me a second. Let me just double check that we don't have any questions. Okay, it appears that we do have a question. Does this include school age as well? So this is for birth through 5. So it does not encompass school age. However, if you do have questions with regards to school agers and concerns, we certainly can help give you a little bit of guidance. But as far as requests for service and the behavior boot camp, it is for birth through 5. So hopefully that answered that. Okay, and it looks like that was our only question. So I'm going to go ahead and get right into what we are going to talk about today, which is behavior, what it is and where it comes from. We, like I said, have approximately 50 more minutes together, so I am only scratching the surface, but this is good information for you to take in yourself and also to share with your teachers, because we know that behavior is an ongoing topic, an ongoing area of concern for programs, and especially with us just starting the school year, we want to make sure that we're getting everybody off on the right foot. So first, let's talk about what behavior is, because when we think about behavior, we think about challenging behavior, right? It's those things that are disruptive to our day. It's those children who aren't coming to circle, the friends who are hitting, who are eloping and running from the classroom. Those are the behaviors that I think we think of most frequently. But what we need to know is the definition of behavior is it's how we act or conduct ourselves, particularly toward others, in response to a particular situation or stimulus. So we all have behavior. So when I'm hungry, my behavior is I go and eat. When I have an itch, I scratch it. So that's still a behavior. It's still a responding to a stimulus. So the second definition, because I pulled a few of them because, I liked what they said. The second one that talks about the response of an individual, group, or species to its environment. And I really love that it points out environment, because for myself as a behavior specialist, when I go into a classroom to observe a child, the first thing I look at is the environment. And that could be to see if it's consistent in terms of the routine, the expectations, the physical setup, the sensory, the sights and the sounds. I look at that to see if the environment could be a trigger for challenging behavior. So I really like that this definition cites that specifically. And then the other definition is that it's an observable activity that's in response to an internal or external stimuli. And I think that's important to note, because how often do we see a behavior? So we see a child hit someone, we see them push someone. And when I ask what happened, I'm typically told they did it for no reason, or they did it because they felt like it. And it's important for us to recognize that there's always a reason, even if you don't know what it is in the moment. So it could be an internal stimuli, which you can't see inside their little bodies, or it could be something external. So those things I think are so important for us just to get off on the right foot when we're talking about behavior, that we all have behavior. We're here today to talk specifically about challenging behavior or disruptive behavior, but we need to keep in mind things like the environment, and that it's internal or external stimuli that provoke these types of behaviors. Okay, so what I want to do now is talk to you a little bit about the functions of behavior. So this is the why children do what they do, why we do what we do, all of our behaviors. There's this lovely abbreviation, SEAT. So when we think of the functions of behavior, if you can remember SEAT, or you could change the order. They're not in any particular order. You could make it EATS instead, or ATES, whatever will help you remember it. But SEAT is what is most commonly known in the behavior world. So if you can remember SEAT, you can remember the 4 functions of behavior, the 4 reasons that we behave the way we do. And they are sensory, escape, attention, and tangibles. So every single thing we do, as I said, when you're hungry, you will get food. That's the behavior, right? So that would be sensory, because our internal stimuli is alerting us that we're hungry. Maybe our tummy growls, maybe our head feels a little cloudy, we're having trouble focusing. And so based on that stimuli, we choose to go get some food, right? So sensory, escape, attention, and tangibles. And before we can address behavior, we have to figure out what the function is. What are we trying to accomplish with our behavior? So I want to go through each of these 4 functions so that it can give you an idea when you see a behavior, before you even address it, how you can take a step back and say, okay, what was the behavior, but what was the function? What are they trying to gain by exhibiting this behavior? Okay, so before we jump right into that, I just want to double check. Do we have any questions at this point? And let's see, it looks like we don't. So we're going to just move onward and upward. Okay, so our first function of behavior, this one is sensory. Sensory behavior is typically that reason for behavior when we're told it happens for no reason, they did it because they felt like it. It's usually a sensory cause. So sensory behavior is behavior that stimulates the senses. It either gives an individual a sensation that's pleasing. So it's, like if we have an itch, we scratch it. So that behavior of scratching is because it feels good. Or to remove a sensation that's undesirable. The itch is undesirable, so we're itching to relieve it. And once we have, then we stop itching. Really the key thing with sensory behavior is that third bullet there, that it happens across environments, whether another person is present or not. So if you're not sure if a child is, hitting themselves or tapping their foot or things like that, if they're doing something, whether a person is present or not, that can be an indicator as to if it's a sensory behavior. Because if, a lot of times we think they do things for attention. In order to be doing something for attention, there has to be someone there to give them the attention. With sensory behavior, it will happen whether you are all by yourself or whether you are in a crowded room, your movie theater, a circle time area. These behaviors are present. Now, the other thing with sensory behavior is you have children who seek sensory input, and you also have children who are trying to avoid sensory. So some children who are sensory seeking, they may play too rough. They can seek extremes in play. So like they like to climb and jump off of high areas. They love loud noises. So when it's quiet, they're the ones who are creating the chaos. They lack personal space. They may chew on their clothing. Like sometimes if they chew on the collars of their clothing, or pencils, toys, putting things in their mouth. Maybe they jump and run everywhere, skip places. So those children are seeking sensory input. But on the flip side of that, when you have children who are avoiding sensory input, they are sensitive to touch. They may withdraw in response if somebody comes near them. They like quiet. So sometimes if things are too loud, too bright, too chaotic, you may see them start to cry or lash out or try to run away. They also may be a little clingier to their support system, their loved ones. They may like looser fitting clothing because they don't want things touching them. So it's a lot of information when we're looking at sensory behavior. But those are kind of some keys of things to look at. And the other thing, and like I said, we're just scratching the surface. Sensory is like days worth of training, like information about sensory. But something that I learned a little while back, which I thought was fascinating, is that, you know, when we're in school, we learn about the five senses. We see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, but there's actually two additional senses, and it's proprioception and vestibular sense. And it is important for us to know that this is this is a thing, because I think that the more knowledge we have, the more we can address behaviors appropriately. So, so just real quick, when we're talking about proprioception, what we're talking about is that joint and muscle awareness. So having awareness of their movements. And when we're talking about vestibular sense, that's awareness of their body in an environment and movement. So you may have experienced, you know, the outside playtime, right? So those kids who have wiggles and need to like get their energy out, being able to have that gross motor time, that time when they can run and use their joints, that's all good for their proprioception and vestibular sense. When children are not allowed to explore those senses, that's where we see a deficit. Sometimes that's where we see poor balance and clumsiness. So making sure that, as I had talked about a month ago at another Naptime News, making sure that the activities that are offered are meeting these needs sensory-wise. So giving them fine motor and gross motor activities and things that they can do, that can cut down on some of your behaviors. So that's just something to keep in mind. So before I move on, because our EAT of the functions of behavior, the escape, attention, and tangible, are so much better known than sensory. So before I move on to those, I do want to take a second just to see if there are any questions, because I think sensory is one that we can kind of trip up on, or maybe don't acknowledge that as a reason for behavior. So let me just double check here and make sure we don't have any questions before moving on. Okay, and it looks like we don't. So I'm going to go ahead and move it right along. So we've talked about our S of our seat. Now we're going to move on to our E. This is escape behavior. Now, sometimes we can mistake attention seeking for escape, or sometimes what starts as one of these turns into another. So let's say you have a child who's sensory avoidant, and you are forcing them to engage in something that sensory wise is just not doing it for them. They may then exhibit escape behavior, which is trying to get out of the activity or whatever it is. So when we talk about escape, it's exactly like it sounds. It's when you're trying to avoid something. So again, let's think about behavior. So our antecedent, or our thing that happened right before, we'll talk about ourselves. Your phone rings, you look at it, and it is someone you do not want to talk to, right? So you want to avoid that interaction. So you don't answer your phone, or you silence it, or, wrong number, whatever it is. Your behavior is that you are trying to avoid this conversation or answering your phone. So things that we try to avoid, like I said, it could be people, it could be a situation, it could be in an environment, or it could be a task, right? So maybe we're trying to get out of cleanup. So, at transition time, it's time to clean up, and you've got a child who's wandering around the classroom, and they're trying to escape having to clean up, or maybe they're trying to escape circle time, or things of that nature. So look at, again, those behaviors, and a child wandering around the classroom during cleanup time isn't necessarily a challenging behavior in terms of it's disruptive or harmful, but they are avoiding a task that you want them to do. So being able to identify those moments is important. Now, usually when we see this type of behavior, it's being fueled by an emotion. And it's usually one of our strong negative emotions, typically, such as fear, anxiety, boredom. And in the case of cleaning up, it could be that they're overwhelmed. I can't tell you how many times I see children play in an area where they've dumped the toys all over the place and then they don't want to clean them up. And it's because they're overwhelmed. They made a huge mess, and it's really easy to make a mess, and it's a lot harder to clean it up and sort the bins. So, so keeping in mind, when we're talking social emotional development, that our behavior can be fueled by, these emotions that cause us to act in a certain way. Now, how you choose to address behavior that's being fueled in terms of trying to escape something, how you address it can either reinforce it or extinguish the behavior. So if you have, let's say you're in your pre-K classroom and you have the children who are sitting and practicing writing their names. You have a child who is sitting there and he starts tapping the other child next to him with a pencil and poking him. Now, that could be attention-seeking behavior, which we haven't quite gotten to yet, or it could be that maybe he's having trouble holding his pencil properly and he's avoiding writing his name because he worries that he's going to make a mistake. So that behavior of tapping the other child, poking the other child, he's exhibiting that behavior to escape the task of doing it. How you address that behavior. If you choose to yell at him, tell him he can't go play, until he does it, whatever how you handle it, you can either reinforce his behavior or extinguish it. So if you, I want to make sure I explain this clearly. So let's say, for example, you say, because you're touching him, you have to go sit over here in this area and put together a puzzle, right? Typically, if it were escape behavior, he's next time going to continue that behavior of poking. Why? Because what they were trying to accomplish is getting out of the writing assignment. And so regardless of what you had them go and do, they got out of the writing assignment, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Versus they want attention from the other child, and that's why they're doing it, and you remove the child from the environment. Well, perhaps he won't, he won't do that next time because he wants the attention from that child, and you've removed that opportunity. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of when we look at why a child does what they do and how we handle it. You can see how you can extinguish the behavior or make the behavior worse. And if you have any questions or need clarification on that, please ask, because that's why we're doing this today. Now, in that situation, a technique you could use is first then statements. So first, write your name on the paper, then you can play with this toy and make sure it's a desired toy. First, clean up the blocks, then you can go over to sensory. So first then statements are really good when it comes to escape behavior, breaking tasks down into something more manageable, kind of getting to the root of it. All good ways to handle escape behavior. Now, we have some examples on the slide of other things. I use the example of he's poking the child next to him and being disruptive in that way. But it could be a tantrum, it could be crying, it could be physically lashing out. It could be elopement or running away. It could be lying, and it could be daydreaming. When I talk about lying, think about why we lie. Why do we not tell the truth? because we don't want to get in trouble. We made a mistake, right? We are escaping a consequence. So all of those things are, when we daydream, we are escaping our reality. And usually, why do we daydream? It could be boredom. It could also be fear or anxiety. Kids who have experienced trauma, they may be daydreaming of something more pleasant than the environment that they're currently in. They're trying to escape that reality. So when we know that it's escape, we really have to think about then how do we address it so that we can get their needs met and our needs met and support their social emotional development. All right, are there any questions at all on escape behavior before I move on? All right, looks like we don't. All right, we got a quiet group. Okay, so moving on to our A behavior, it is attention. Now, this is what our teachers tend to identify a lot of behavior as typically. Usually it's, oh, they want attention, that's why they're doing this, or a lot of things when I ask like what happened is they want attention, they wanted this, so as I gave you an example earlier, it could be escape versus attention, right? And we need to stop looking at attention-seeking behavior as like a bad thing. No, the behavior itself, hitting, crying, things like that, getting up and doing a crazy dance at circle time when you're trying to read them a story, we need to start looking at attention-seeking behavior a little bit differently, and not in terms of like that behavior is not okay, and we need to address it, but in terms of why is a child seeking attention? And that's where relationships really come into play here. When a child engages in attention-seeking behavior, it's usually that they want that focus to be on them. And it could be a peer, it could be an adult. But we need to keep in mind from a child's perspective, if they want attention, they will get it however they can, whether it's negative or positive. Attention is attention to them. And depending on the environment they're coming from, maybe the attention they get is negative and that's what they're used to. And for them, that negative attention equals love to them, equals what's appropriate for them based on their environment. So we really need to replace attention seeking with connection. Those kids who are seeking attention are really seeking a connection, whether it's from their peer or whether it's from an adult in the classroom, one of the teachers. It could be that they don't know how to appropriately enter into play. So maybe that's why when children are playing in the block area, they come in and knock everything down and kick the blocks. It could be that it's a skill they haven't learned. It could also be a skill that they've learned inappropriately. So, when you're on the telephone and a child wants your attention, do they tap you and wait, or do they yell, mommy, 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 mommy? And both of those are attention seeking, but one is more appropriate than the other. So that's where our teachers need to come into play. And you could do role playing, modeling of how can we get attention in a more appropriate way. So you can do role playing with the children, but also if you have a child who keeps trying to get your attention and they're doing it in a negative way, carve out some time, maybe it's during nap time, that transition into nap, maybe they're a non-napper, when you can sit with them, because I know it's hard with like so many kids in the classroom to get that one-on-one, but try to carve out time independent of their behavior, right? So if it's from like 2 to 2:15, they sit on their cot and you read them a story. Spending that time with them is reinforcing that they will get attention, they will get time, and they will get it positively instead of being scolded, reprimanded, that they will get that attention positively, which can decrease those negative attention-seeking behaviors. So when a child knows they're going to get that one-on-one time with you or that attention from you, then they may not seek it in other times during the day. Also keep in mind, siblings, right? So when you've got children who come from, multi-children homes, the adults in their house are carving time out between, 2, 3, and 4 children and a work day and maybe a spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, the dog. So they have to fight for attention. So how they get that attention at home may be how they're trying to get that attention at school as well. So it's important that we teach them replacement behaviors, that we model for them, and remember how you address it. Just like attention seeking, how you choose to address that behavior is either going to reinforce that behavior is going to work for them, or it's going to extinguish it because they're going to find that it's not going to work for them. All right, so just checking in real quick. Any questions? All right, no questions. So we are moving right along. Okay. And our final function of behavior is the T, which is tangibles. Tangibles means stuff. A child wants stuff. So they want toys, they want food, they want to play a video game. When we see kids have tantrums in grocery stores, they're in the checkout line and they really want that candy bar or that toy. What do? They reach for it. They cry, they stomp their feet, they clear the shelf off. That behavior, so we see what the behavior is, the hitting, the crying, the stomping their feet, came from trying to get access to a tangible. How you choose to react to that is either going to extinguish or reinforce the behavior. If you tell the child no, and they keep crying and they do something, and typically, if we're talking like out in the world, maybe you're embarrassed, you're tired, you're whatever it is, if you give into that behavior, what have you done? You reinforce that behavior is going to work for you. So if you have a child in your classroom who doesn't want to clean up, they made a huge mess and they start crying and just throwing a fit, and you've got 19 other children who you have to have wash their hands and get to lunch, and you're all by yourself, what are you going to do? Do you stand your ground with that child? Do you give in and clean the mess up for them? Because we've seen that kind of stuff happen. So let's say you clean the mess up for them because it's just easier, because 1, you're going to put it away better, you're going to put it away where it goes. 2, then you can get the other 19 children to wash their hands and get off to lunch. And 3, you're tired, maybe you didn't get a lot of sleep the night before, or you don't feel well, you're stressed out from COVID, whatever the case is, you give in and just take care of it. You have then reinforced this behavior to the child. So the next time that it's time to clean up, guess what they're going to do? They're going to go ahead and do that again, because what they've learned is it's working for them, versus not giving in and saying, okay, I'll pick up these green blocks and I'm going to leave the red blocks for you. So then you're helping them. And then they need to pick up the green blocks. And you can say, first clean up the green blocks, then you can join us over here to wash your hands and go to snack or lunch. And you have to follow through with them. You can make it fun, say like, okay, I'm going to time you. How many minutes is it going to take you to clean up all these green blocks? Sometimes we kind of need to shift them out of that mindset of the behavior. So if you do have a child who wants a toy, who says, okay, this is mine, and they take it and they throw a fit, and that other child is afraid they're going to get hit, and they get to keep the toy, well, then what you've just taught them is, if I scream or raise my fist, that child's going to be scared and I'm going to get to keep the toy. So it's, again, we need to look at like how we react to behavior either makes behavior worse or makes behavior better. Now, when we talk about tangibles, while we say like when you give in, it reinforces that behavior, tangibles can be used to modify or train behavior. So when we think about potty training, having a sticker chart or something like that when they go pee-pee on the potty, they get a sticker or they get to mark it on their chart or something like that. Now, that type of tangible is good because that's being used as a reinforcer because we want to repeat that behavior. So yes, you can use tangibles as reinforcers, but if it's that a child is seeking something physical, access to food, toys, activity, you do need to be mindful of, if you give in, you're going to be reinforcing the behavior. Okay. All right. And I think we are good as far as questions. Okay. All right. So since we don't have any questions on the functions of behavior, I'd like to take a minute to talk about trauma. Because when we are talking about the functions of behavior and why children do what they do, children's exposure to trauma, it affects brain development, it affects behavior, and it's important for us to have a trauma-informed approach when we are working with children who have experienced trauma. That word is very subjective because what one may consider traumatic, another may not. And that depends on things like resilience and protective factors. Resilience is your ability to bounce back. So I think of it as a rubber band. So if you stretch a rubber band, it bounces back, right? But sometimes we can stretch a rubber band too far and it may break. Sometimes you have rubber bands that like have sat in a drawer for a long time and they get kind of worn down, and so you pull them and they don't have as much elasticity and maybe they break. So when we talk about our resilience, it's our ability to bounce back based on a number of things, and it's you know, our community, our relationships with other individuals, our home lives. And I'm here to tell you that each one of you who are tuned in right now, you play a role in a child's ability to have resilience and build resilience. So when we look at trauma, so this is defined as it's something that results from exposure to an incident or series of incidents. So there's PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, historically has been tied to military, but it could be somebody who was a victim of sexual abuse, or you know, maybe they were raped, or maybe there was a car accident. So a specific incident that causes this trauma and the stress response, and a series of events or complex trauma that could be living in poverty, drug abuse, you know, anything that community violence, anything that's ongoing, and it's emotionally disturbing or life-threatening, and it has lasting adverse effects on an individual's functioning, their mental, physical, social, emotional, and or spiritual well-being. So when we think of our children, I don't want to get too technical in terms of the science behind it, but basically when our stress responses kick in, cortisol is released, and you know, our fight or flight mode kicks in when we've had something happen. Now, when you have children who are living in environments where they are constantly exposed to these triggers, right? This complex trauma, they are constantly getting cortisol and all of these adrenaline boosters pumped into their system. When that happens, think about how that messes with your brain. Think about you're driving to work and you have to slam on your brakes, and how you feel when that happens. You feel shaky and jittery and like, oh my gosh, right? And you feel that way for a while, right? You might get to work and you're still feeling kind of shaky, like, oh my gosh, I almost had a car accident. That was horrible. But it maybe wears off as you go through the day, and maybe you don't think about it again. Or maybe when you go to get in the car, you're still a little like apprehensive. So now envision you're a 2, 3, 4-year-old child who experiences this event. who lacks the social emotional skills, the coping skills to handle that, to reason, to explain and understand what is happening. When you have these children who are constantly exposed to this, domestic violence or any kind of sexual abuse, they're getting that adrenaline and cortisol pumped into them constantly. So they're always in fight or flight mode. Sometimes what we see is behavior that is actually linked to a trauma a child has experienced and not an immediate stimulus. So when we see these kids again that say like, oh, they did it for no reason, right? Sorry to get off on a tangent, but I want to tell you about Oprah Winfrey just wrote a book with Bruce Perry called What Happened to You, and I'm in the middle of reading it. And in one of the chapters, Bruce Perry talks about a child who was in a facility for, he'd been in trouble and whatnot, but he was really turning his life around, was doing really well. And then he had a teacher who was this male teacher. And for whatever reason, this child kept acting up in his teacher's class, and he was really disruptive. There was just a huge uptick in behavior, right? So one day, Dr. Perry went with the child for a parent visit with his dad. And the dad clearly had been drinking, even though he's not supposed to, before he goes for a child visit. And he covered it up with the smell of Old Spice. And when Dr. Perry smelled it, he thought about how his dad used to wear Old Spice and how like he would go fishing with his dad and all of these really positive experiences from this smell. Then he stopped to think about the child and how the child's dad was drinking, and he used that smell to cover up that he was an alcoholic. And who knows what the dad's behaviors were to the child, if he was physically abusive or whatever it was, but you could tell the child was really like uncomfortable and had some feelings, like he was outwardly showing them. So fast forward to a conversation that Bruce Perry has with this teacher. And when he's talking to this teacher, he gets a whiff of Old Spice. So the teacher is wearing Old Spice and he says, "What kind of deodorant do you wear?" And the teacher's like, "Old Spice? That's a weird question." And it turns out that the teacher wore the same scent as his father, who he had really negative experiences with. And this scent, this smell, was a trigger for the child, which is where the behavior was coming from. As soon as the teacher stopped wearing the Old Spice and changed his deodorant, the behaviors decreased. So I thought that was really fascinating. And I share that with you because I thought it was really poignant. And I feel like these are the kinds of things we need to have relationships with our children and be knowledgeable about their background and their history, because when we are, it helps us understand where that behavior is coming from, aside from the immediate thing that happened right beforehand. So trauma can play a huge part in behavioral responses. Now, excuse me one second. Now on the left side of this slide is a pyramid model with regards to ACEs. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And basically Kaiser Permanente did a survey where they asked 10 questions to assess negative experiences or adverse experiences that children had prior to the age of 18. It was things about if your parents drank, if there was mental illness, if there was sexual abuse. And depending on what your score was, they found a link between these negative childhood experiences and later in life health issues. And it was Kaiser Permanente, which is a health insurance company. So they were more interested in how do we save money, because we don't want to pay for all these treatments for things like heart disease and diabetes and obesity when it can be prevented. So this ACEs study is really instrumental when we look at the long-term impact of trauma. And what we see is at the bottom of the pyramid, these are those negative experiences. So every time a child has negative experience, it disrupts their brain development and the connections that they're making, which can then lead to these social emotional impairments. So inability to have trusting relationships, the inability to have impulse control, right? So those people that get into fights and they're, or are stealing or are doing the wrong things. And there is a correlation that then they adopt health risk behaviors. So they eat more as a coping mechanism. They are drinking, they turn to drugs. They maybe are domestically violent. And then from this behavior that they have, this adaptive or maladaptive behavior, it leads to things like disease. So they could get, heart disease, diabetes. They, if they're doing drugs, they could overdose, things like that. And ultimately, it leads to an early death. So all these negative experiences that children have can disrupt their entire life. And I'm sorry if I'm getting so animated, but this is a subject I feel incredibly passionate about. And I think is so important that we, as a community, are very aware of, because being exposed to trauma is not a death sentence. And that's where resilience comes in. That's where having relationships with trusted adults comes into play. That's where the more love you have, the more consistency you have. And we do get frustrated by parents, by situations. We know we could do it better, and if we could just adopt all these children. But what do we do with the time that we have these children? Because I can tell you, some of our toughest behavior cases have the most heartbreaking stories, and they are dealing with experiences that are significantly harder to deal with, even as an adult. And we're asking 2, 3, and 4-year-olds who have limited coping skills and resilience already built up. So I will get off my soapbox now. I will get off my soapbox and let me look and see. I think we do have a question. Is this being recorded so we can show our staff? And looks like yes, we will have this available for providers. It'll be on our website under the providers page by the end of the day today. So yes, please share this with your staff, because let's be honest, I know I'm preaching to the choir that you have all, you're probably the directors and the supervisors and the head honchos who have been in this field and are incredibly passionate and have been doing this for years. But you may have some really inexperienced staff, some green staff that just could use this knowledge. So please share it with them. And having a trauma-informed approach when we work with our children, what I can tell you as the leaders in our community of childcare is using this trauma-informed approach when you're dealing with your staff will also make a huge difference. When we take into account why staff behave the way they do, why they do what they do, everything I'm telling you today, it's not just for the purpose of our classrooms. This is how you deal with people. Like, we all have 4 functions of behavior, why we do each thing that we do. There's a reason behind it. So, so when someone wrongs you, think about that. Think about, like, why did they do what they did? And, and that helps your social emotional development. You're looking, you're building empathy, so we all can continue to grow in these areas. But please, share with your staff. That was a great question. All right. So, so when we are looking at our little rascals who are having difficulty with their behavior when they've been exposed to trauma, which we may know, we may not know, here's what this does to their social emotional development. They have trouble regulating their emotions. They may cry a lot. They may be angry. They may not totally understand. I have had kids that kind of black out and they are little Tasmanian devils. And, I always call that riding the wave. In that moment, you ride the wave with them until they get out of their reptilian brain and back to where, we can regroup and we can address what's going on. We can problem solve. So our kiddos who have experienced trauma, they have difficulty regulating emotions. They're in a constant state of hyper arousal, that fight or flight mode. Those kids are they are always looking. I'm working with a child right now who he is always in fight or flight mode. He's had a traumatic situation happen in his life. Lovely, lovely guy. I just think he's the sweetest kid, but you can tell just when you're talking to him, his eyes are darting around the classroom. They're always looking around. They're always taking in everything. And we as educators, sometimes we're very quick to self-diagnose, which we should not be doing. We are not doctors. I hear a lot, oh, well, they have ADHD or they have autism or they have, because they have a little quirk about them. I can't tell you how many times I hear, I think they have ADHD. This child is potentially one of those kids, which I have not heard at this program, but somebody might look at this child and say, ooh, that he's got ADHD. He can't focus. He can't make eye contact for any amount of time. But when you look at his trauma, he is in constant fight or flight mode, making sure he's safe, making sure the environment's safe, making sure there's not a lion at the door, so to speak. So that's why he does what he does. So instead of us rushing to, oh, there must be a diagnosis, when we look at that trauma impact. And the signs are very similar though. Someone who's been impacted by trauma, someone who has ADHD, there's a lot of overlap there, and that's where we see a lot of misdiagnosis. But please do not try to diagnose. We are not doctors, okay? I'm not a doctor, you're not a doctor, your teachers aren't doctors. These kids are also quicker to physical aggression. They have less impulse control. Again, it's that fight or flight. They have trouble reading and understanding facial cues and body language. So, what we perceive as, let's say we want that child to look at us, look at me when I'm talking to you. That's a social cue, right? But they may not make eye contact because in their experience through their trauma lens, they made eye contact right before somebody smacked them in the side of the head for talking too loud. So being aware that, their inability to read situations, social situations, body language, and that causes trouble building healthy relationships, which is one of the 5 pillars of social emotional development. They may isolate themselves so they don't engage with other individuals. Physical touch can serve as a trigger. So, even a hug, a pat on the back, things that are meant to be loving can be perceived as dangerous to a child who's been exposed to trauma. And there are triggers that can cause re-traumatization. So playing in dramatic play may bring something up. It's like the military veteran who saw combat and then they hear fireworks and think they're back in the trenches again. So triggers can bring these things back up. So it's, as I said with Dr. Perry, that smell of Old Spice with this teacher, it triggered a behavior in the child. So it's really so important that we recognize trauma. What happened to you? And my final thoughts before I see for the last time if we have any questions. There's ABCs of behavior management. We've talked about the functions of behavior, but how you can assess behavior. You look at what happened right before the behavior, which is called your antecedent. You then use that to assess the function of the behavior. Why did they do what they did? What were they doing at the time? What could have played into it? What is their background, having those relationships? And you do this work so that you can address it appropriately with the appropriate consequence, okay? So when you know that you have a child who is exhibiting an escape behavior, you might handle that different than a child who's experiencing a sensory behavior. Change your mindset, all right? There are no bad kids. There are no bad kids. I truly believe that. There are those who are misled. There are those who have maybe learned some poor habits, but there are no bad children out there. And we need to shift that mindset from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. We really need to start changing that. If we started looking at behavior, when we think about development, we've got, we always are so worried about speech and language, about fine motor and gross motor. If we start looking at social emotional development more as development and behavior more as development, I think if we shifted that mindset, we would have a better outcome. Instead of looking at behavior as a disruption to our day and putting the focus on stopping the behavior, if we really dig to look at like, where is this coming from? How can I help you? How can I connect with you? I think we would have a much happier, happier world, so to speak. We have to use the knowledge of a child's past and present experiences to understand behavior. And note how I say not excuse, because a lot of times people confuse that and they think, well, you're just excusing the behavior. No, I'm trying to understand it so I can work with them more effectively. So when you do that, when you look at a child's past and their experiences, you can then choose the proper route to guide behavior and de-escalate situations rather than escalate them. Real quick example, you have a child who is sneaking food from the lunch table and putting it in their cubby. A teacher without any knowledge may address that as, we need to eat lunch at the lunch table. Do not put that in your cubby. Bring it back here right now. That child may then feel some kind of way. They may get upset. They may be even sneakier. But maybe that missing piece is that that child is either currently in a situation where they don't know where the next meal is coming from, or maybe they're in foster care for neglect, and they're working through that because he had some type of traumatic situation that made them feel like they couldn't get food at some point. And so that behavior has been adaptive to their environment. If you knew that, maybe you would say, honey, it's okay. If you want more, you can just ask for it. If you need a snack, just let me know. You don't have to hide it there. It's okay. And what are you doing? You're helping them feel safe, secure, building that relationship instead of scolding them and making them feel bad, right? So we're building kids up, not breaking them down. Behavior always comes from something, even if it's not obvious at first. So to wrap this up before I take questions, I just want to read you, because I ain't got a pencil, which is just something to keep in mind as we end our time together. I woke myself up because we ain't got an alarm clock. Dug in the dirty clothes basket because ain't nobody washed my uniform. Brushed my hair and teeth in the dark because the lights ain't on. Even got my baby sister ready because my mama wasn't home. Got us both to school on time to eat us a good breakfast. Then when I got to class, the teacher fussed because I ain't got a pencil. So think about that when you're dealing with behavior. Think about that. So at this time, are there any questions before we end our Friday time together? Okay. All right, it looks like we do not have any questions. So I will go ahead and leave this up here so that you have my email address. If you do have any questions or needs, I am always here for you. I'm the North County Behavior Specialist. As I said, we are adding some additional behavior specialists, but as of right now, I'm North County. If you're not in my area and you have questions, you can email me anyway. And if I don't know the answer, I can find it for you. So please reach out, share your successes too. I always like making new friends and hearing of victories. And then my final plug, make sure you look into Behavior Bootcamp if you're interested. Get that application filled out and send it in to us because that's what we're here for. So that being said, I'm dropping the digital mic, I guess, so I can send you on your way to enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you all have a happy Friday, a wonderful weekend, get some rest, you deserve it. Remember to take care of yourself and fill your bucket so that you can come back Monday and we'll do it all again. All right, thanks so much, guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.